How did a man whom future NBA legends called one of the most talented players of his generation never play a single game in the league? Why did Kareem Abdul-Jabbar admire his play while his own career collapsed after one fateful choice? Be sure to watch this video to the end. In the finale, a little-known fact awaits you that will completely change your perception of the man Harlem called the GOAT. How did it happen that a man whom many great basketball players called stronger than future NBA stars never actually played in the league? Why was his name spoken with admiration by those who would later become legends of world basketball, while today most fans have no idea who Earl Manigault was? What happened to the man whom Harlem considered a true phenomenon, capable of doing things on the court that seemed impossible to others? And most importantly, why did his story turn not into a fairy tale about a great champion, but into one of the most tragic fates in basketball history? Be sure to watch this video to the end. In the finale, a little-known fact awaits you that will make you look at Earl Manigault's life in a completely different way and help you understand why his incredible talent never took him where he seemed destined to be. In basketball history, there are many players who never fulfilled their potential. But the case of Earl Manigault stands apart. He wasn't just called an outstanding athlete. Many people who played against him or watched him with their own eyes were convinced that his natural talent surpassed the abilities of most professionals of that era. Future NBA legend Kareem Abdul-Jabbar repeatedly said that Earl was one of the most talented players he had ever seen. Other outstanding basketball players of that era, including Connie Hawkins, spoke of him with no less respect. In New York, his name was known to virtually everyone who had even a slight interest in street basketball. For many young players, meeting Manigault on the court became a real test, and sometimes a lesson that could not be forgotten. He was called the GOAT, long before the word GOAT became a globally known acronym for the greatest player of all time. In Earl's case, this nickname was not born from marketing or television. It appeared on the street courts of Harlem, where respect could not be gained through loud words. It could only be earned through play. Thousands of people came to watch this lanky guy do things with the ball that seemed impossible. His speed, incredible leaping ability, ball control, and finishing skills made such a strong impression that stories about him quickly turned into real legends. Some thought they were exaggerations. Others swore they had seen it all with their own eyes. But almost no one argued with the main point. Earl Manigault was a truly special player. And yet today, when people talk about the greatest basketball players of the past, his name is rarely heard. Young NBA fans often have never heard of him, and many who have come across this name don't understand why there is so much talk about him. After all, in the official statistics of the league, he simply does not exist. He never won NBA championships, never set records in professional basketball, and never appeared in an all-star game. The question arises that has haunted people for many decades. How did a man considered a future superstar end up almost forgotten? What had to happen for a player with such a gift to forever remain only a legend of New York's courts rather than a world celebrity? The answer to this question begins long before the loud talk about his incredible talent. To understand how it all happened, we need to go back to Harlem, the neighborhood where Earl Manigault's fate began to take shape long before all of New York learned the name of the man nicknamed the GOAT. Earl Manigault was born on September 7, 1944, in Charleston, South Carolina. But the true arena that defined his entire life was not that city at all. As a child, he moved with his family to New York, where they settled in Harlem, a neighborhood that, in the middle of the last century, lived by its own rules. Today, Harlem is associated with rich culture, music, and basketball. But in the 1950s, it was a completely different place. High crime rates, poverty, constant street conflicts, and a huge number of young people trying to find their place in life. For many teenagers, There were only a few paths available. Some gradually fell into the criminal world. Others sought salvation in sports. And it was basketball that became the chance for thousands of kids to choose a completely different road. Almost every block had a court where real battles raged from morning until late evening. No one paid attention to age, origin, or last name here. The only criterion was the game. If you showed a high level, you were respected. If not, no one was going to make allowances for you. It was in this atmosphere that Earl grew up. From an early age, he literally lived on the basketball court. He could spend entire days there, repeatedly practicing moves, watching older players, and trying to imitate the most complex moves. Every new game became an opportunity for him to prove that he deserved to play with the best. Very quickly, those around him noticed that this was no ordinary child. Earl had amazing coordination, incredibly quick feet, and a reaction that even adult players might envy. He easily changed direction, made instantaneous decisions, and seemed to know in advance where the ball would be a second later. But what amazed people most was his physical giftedness. Despite his relatively modest height of about 6'1", he had such a powerful leap that opponents took a long time to believe their own eyes. Later, many legends would surround his abilities. Some stories would prove to be greatly exaggerated. Others would be confirmed by eyewitnesses. But even in his teenage years, it was clear. Earl was doing things on the court that most players didn't even try to imitate. At the same time, he did not rely only on his natural abilities. Almost every day, he refined his technique, striving to be faster, more accurate, and more inventive than everyone else. Street basketball in Harlem did not forgive mistakes. One weak performance and respect had to be won all over again. That is why every appearance on the court turned into an exam. Gradually, rumors about the extraordinary teenager began to spread far beyond his neighborhood. First, neighboring blocks started talking about him. Then, all of Harlem. And soon, Earl Manigault's name began to appear more and more often among school coaches and people closely following young talents in New York. Ahead of him lay a moment after which he would no longer be just a promising teenager. Very soon, the whole city would start talking about a basketball player whose game seemed impossible even to those who had seen hundreds of outstanding athletes on the court. When Earl entered William Howard Taft High School in the Bronx, his talent began to unfold not only on the street courts. Now he had to show himself in organized basketball, where coaches, journalists, and scouts closely watched young players. It was here that it became clear that the talk about the unusual teenager from Harlem was not an exaggeration at all. From almost the first games, Manigault made all of New York talk about him. His style of play was sharply different from what spectators were used to. He didn't just score points. He did it so spectacularly that every successful attack caused a roar from the stands. It seemed that the laws of physics acted on him a little differently. He hung in the air longer than others, changed direction mid-jump, and finished attacks as easily as if the rim were much lower. But Earl's most dangerous weapon was not only his athleticism. He had a tremendous feel for the game. He saw open spaces before his opponents, made instant decisions, and could create opportunities out of nothing. Even experienced defenders often lost their bearings trying to anticipate his next move. Very quickly, school games featuring him began to attract huge crowds. People came not just to watch basketball, they wanted to see the player the whole city was talking about. Many made special trips from other New York neighborhoods to see for themselves whether this guy was really as good as they said. During one of the most famous school games, Earl scored 57 points against Power Memorial Academy, the school of future great center Lou Alcindor, who would later become known worldwide as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. This game instantly made Manigault's name even more famous. Even though Earl's team lost, his individual performance left a huge impression on everyone in the building. Gradually, Stories began to grow around him that were passed from mouth to mouth. Some said he could jump so high that he could touch the top of the backboard. Others claimed he could touch the rim twice in one jump. Over time, these stories became part of New York's basketball folklore. Some eyewitnesses confirmed certain episodes, others considered them beautiful exaggerations, but almost no one doubted one thing: Earl's physical abilities were truly outstanding. It was then that the nickname the GOAT finally stuck with him. It's important to understand that in the 1960s it had a completely different meaning than it does today. It was not a popular acronym for greatest of all time. For Harlem residents, it was a street nickname that gradually became a symbol of a man who could do things on the court that seemed impossible to others. It seemed that only a great future lay ahead of him. Sports experts were confident that after school he would have no trouble continuing his career at a strong college and then ending up among the best players in the country. His talent looked so obvious that the path to professional basketball seemed only a matter of time. But it was at that very moment, when the door to a great future was beginning to open, that another road appeared nearby. At first, it seemed harmless. No one could then imagine that a few decisions made in youth would forever change the life of a man whom many were already calling the future star of American basketball. By the early 1960s, Earl Manigault's name had long since ceased to be known only to school teams. True fame came to him on the legendary street courts of Harlem, where every game drew huge crowds. There were no bright arena lights, television cameras, or multi-million-dollar contracts here. But it was here that basketball legends were born, and respect had to be earned in every new game. The most famous court became Rucker Park, a place that would later turn into a true shrine of street basketball. The best players in New York came here to test themselves against the strongest. Here, no one cared about age or past achievements. If you stepped onto the court, you had to prove your superiority from the first to the last minute. This was where Earl felt at home. His play literally captivated onlookers. He easily penetrated tight defense, changed tempo in a split second, and performed such unexpected moves that opponents would often just freeze. It seemed he saw the court differently than everyone else. While others were thinking about how to finish the attack, Manigault had already found a solution. But what amazed spectators most was his ability to play above the rim. For a man about 6'1", this looked almost unbelievable. His leap drew admiration even from experienced basketball players, and his spectacular finishes made crowds come back again and again specifically for his games. Very quickly, stories about Earl began to spread throughout New York at incredible speed. Some claimed he could touch the top edge of the backboard. Others told of the famous double dunk, as if after the first dunk he managed to catch the ball above the rim and put it in again without landing. These stories were passed down for decades. However, over time, it became clear that not all of these stories could be documented. Some eyewitnesses were certain that much of it really did happen that way. Others believed that some episodes had gradually become beautiful legends. Interestingly, Earl himself later denied some of the most incredible stories about his abilities. But this had almost no effect on his reputation. Those who had seen his play with their own eyes said that even without any myths, he was one of the most unusual players of his time. Manigault's popularity grew so fast that not only ordinary basketball fans came to watch him. In the stands, one could increasingly see future professionals, coaches, and people who understood the game very well. Many of them admitted that Earl possessed a set of natural qualities that cannot be acquired through training. It seemed that absolutely all doors were open to him. All of Harlem knew him. All of New York talked about him. Talk grew louder that soon this guy would end up first in a strong college and then in professional basketball. No one doubted his abilities. The only question was how big a star he would become. But it was precisely at that time, when everyone around him saw only a rapid rise, that events had already begun to occur in his life that remained invisible to most spectators. While the public admired yet another incredible play on the court, outside of it, Earl was gradually approaching a choice that would change his entire future. From the outside, it seemed that nothing could stop Earl Manigault. He was one of the most famous young players in New York. New stories constantly swirled around his name, and many were certain that a professional career awaited him. But it was during this period that something no one expected happened. The early 1960s were a difficult time for many New York neighborhoods. Along with crime, drugs spread rapidly through the streets. Young people who had recently dreamed of a sports career or education increasingly found themselves in environments where such things gradually became a familiar part of life. Earl was no exception. At the age of 17, he tried heroin for the first time. He could not yet imagine how quickly this mistake would begin to destroy everything he had been building for years. What first seemed like an isolated incident gradually turned into a serious addiction that began to quietly take over his life. The changes began to show very quickly. Discipline suffered, problems with school arose, and relationships with coaches deteriorated. The man who had recently been considered a model of incredible talent increasingly missed classes and lost control of his own life. Soon, the consequences became so serious that the school administration decided to expel him. For most young athletes, such an event would mean the end of all hopes. In those years, school basketball was the main path to strong colleges and then to a professional career. Losing that path threatened his entire future. However, fate gave Earl another chance. After being expelled, he was able to continue his education at Laurinburg Institute in North Carolina. This institution already had a reputation as a place where talented athletes could correct past mistakes and once again attract the attention of college coaches. The move became an opportunity to start life over. In his new team, he once again displayed the basketball that had made him famous. His talent had not disappeared. When Earl fully focused on the game, it became clear that in terms of ability, he still surpassed most of his peers. It seemed that the worst was behind him. Many began to say again that the path to big basketball could still be salvaged. Colleges continued to closely watch a player whose name was already known far beyond New York. It seemed that only a few right steps remained, and his former dream would become reality again. But the most dangerous feature of addiction is that it rarely disappears on its own. Even far from Harlem, Earl continued to fight not only opponents on the court, but also a problem that was gradually becoming stronger than his own character. On the surface, it seemed that he was regaining control of his life. In reality, the decisive test was still ahead. It would determine whether the man many already considered a future star of American basketball could truly realize his unique talent, or forever remain only a legend of the street courts. After finishing at Laurinburg Institute, it seemed that fate was once again giving Earl Manigault a chance to return to the path many considered inevitable for him. Despite all his past mistakes, his talent remained obvious. On the court, he was still the same player all of New York talked about. When he fully concentrated on basketball, it was clear his natural abilities had not disappeared. Colleges and people closely monitoring young talents continued to show interest in him. Many were convinced that if Earl could finally leave the past behind, he could begin a professional career. It seemed there was still enough time to make up for lost ground. But reality turned out to be much more complicated. The addiction did not disappear after changing schools. It merely stopped being visible to those around him for a while. Earl continued to struggle with it every day, and this struggle gradually drained the energy he had once devoted only to basketball. Despite this, he kept stepping onto the court and occasionally displayed such a high level of play that spectators once again began to believe in his great future. In those moments, it seemed as if the last few years had never happened. He still easily beat opponents, surprised with his speed, incredible coordination, and that same leap that had already become part of his legend. But off the court, the situation remained unstable. In professional sports, talent alone was not enough. Coaches and team executives paid attention not only to performance, but also to discipline, reliability, and the ability to handle a high level of responsibility. It was here that Earl faced the most serious difficulties. Gradually, it became clear that the path to professional basketball was narrowing. Every new mistake pushed him further from the dream that had once seemed almost guaranteed. Time was working against him. New young players were emerging, competition was getting fiercer, and opportunities to start a career were slowly disappearing. Nevertheless, Earl himself never stopped believing that he could still change his fate. He continued to play, hoping that one lucky opportunity would allow him to start over. Many of his acquaintances were also convinced that professional basketball simply could not lose such talent. But life was already moving in a completely different direction. The problem that had once seemed like a temporary weakness gradually began to completely determine his future. Very soon, it would lead to events after which talk of a future NBA star would almost cease. And Earl Manigault's name would for the first time be associated not with basketball achievements. What Earl's loved ones had feared finally came to pass. The addiction he had unsuccessfully tried to overcome finally took over. Basketball was no longer the main purpose of his life. Increasingly, the talented athlete missed practices, disappeared from his friends' view, and gradually lost touch with the world that had once been ready to accept him as a future star. By the mid-1960s, the situation had become critical. Due to drug possession, Earl came under investigation and subsequently received a prison sentence. For a man who had been considered one of the most promising players in the country just a few years earlier, this was a devastating blow. While his former rivals continued to build their careers and move closer to professional basketball, he found himself completely cut off from the game. The hardest part was not just the imprisonment itself. Much more painful was the realization of how many opportunities had already been lost. Just a few years earlier, his name had been linked to future success in big basketball. Now, he was talked about for an entirely different reason. Time continued to move on. Young talents who had once admired his game gradually became famous athletes themselves. Basketball was changing rapidly. New stars emerged, and Earl's name was heard less and less among those discussing the future of the American game. But even while incarcerated, he never stopped thinking about basketball. According to people who knew him during those years, it was the thought of returning to the court that helped him keep hope alive. He understood that his own decisions had destroyed a career that had seemed almost inevitable. Yet inside, a belief still lived that the chance to make things right was not entirely lost. After his release, Earl made one of the most important decisions of his life. He began to fight his addiction and gradually regain control of himself. This path proved long and very difficult. Every new day required tremendous willpower, but for the first time in a long while, he had a goal again. And although many were already convinced that professional basketball was forever in his past, Manigault refused to agree. He believed that if he could regain his old form, he would still have time to prove to everyone that the talk about his incredible talent was not just beautiful stories. Ahead, a chance would indeed appear that almost no one expected. For a short time, fate would again open a door for Earl to big basketball. But taking advantage of this opportunity would prove far more difficult than he could have imagined. After his release, Earl Manigault truly did what many no longer believed possible. He gradually began to return to basketball. Of course, the years away from the game could not pass without a trace, But when he stepped onto the court, he once again displayed the same talent that had once made him a Harlem legend. People who watched his games said that at times it seemed as if nothing had changed. He still easily beat opponents one-on-one, had a great feel for the game, and amazed with his incredible coordination. For many, this became real proof that Earl's natural gift had not disappeared. It was then that he got a chance that could have completely changed the rest of his life. In the early 1970s, Manigault had the opportunity to show himself before representatives of the Utah Stars, a team in the American Basketball Association, the ABA. At the time, this league was considered a serious competitor to the NBA and brought together many of the strongest players in the country. For Earl, this was a real chance to finally make it into professional basketball. He participated in a tryout and managed to make a good impression with his play. It seemed that after so many years of trials, fate was finally ready to give back what he had been deprived of in his youth. But reality intervened, and it could no longer be changed by talent alone. The several years lost to addiction and imprisonment had left too deep a mark. Professional sports required not only outstanding physical abilities, but also stability, continuous game practice, and an impeccable reputation. It was much harder for Earl to compete with younger players who had been continuously developing and building their careers all that time. In the end, a contract was never signed. For most people, such a failure would mean the final end of a dream. But even after this, Earl did not stop playing. He continued to appear on the famous courts of New York, where crowds still gathered. For Harlem residents, he remained the GOAT, a man whose abilities inspired admiration regardless of whether his name appeared on official rosters of professional teams. Over time, it became increasingly clear that the path to the NBA was closed. While his former peers finished successful seasons and wrote their names into league history, Earl increasingly understood that his own story would turn out completely differently. It was then that an important change occurred. Instead of endlessly regretting lost opportunities, he decided to use his life experience for a completely different purpose. Ahead of him lay a new role, that of a man who would try to keep young Harlem basketball players from making the mistakes that had destroyed his own dream. Earl understood perfectly that he could never get back the lost years. But he also knew something else. His own story could serve as a warning for those just starting out. That is why he began devoting more and more time to young kids from Harlem who, like he once had, dreamed of one day making it to big basketball. He returned to those same courts where he had once made his name, but now his main task was no longer proving he was the best player. Much more important was showing teenagers that true talent is worthless if a person loses control of their own life. Earl readily talked to young people, told them about his own mistakes, and never tried to sugarcoat the past. He openly admitted that he himself had destroyed the opportunities millions of basketball players dream of. It was this honesty that made a powerful impression. Before the kids stood not a man lecturing them, but one who had truly been through difficult trials and managed to draw lessons from them. Over time, he became actively involved in the local basketball community. One of the most famous projects was a tournament that later became known as the GOAT Tournament. For young players, these were not just competitions. Here, they could meet street basketball legends, show their abilities, and get a chance to believe in themselves. Manigault used his authority to encourage as many teenagers as possible to choose sports over the streets. He understood all too well how easy it was to lose the right direction, especially in neighborhoods where temptations were everywhere. That is why every conversation with young players became a personal story, with no attempt to hide his own mistakes and their consequences. Gradually, people's perception of Earl began to change. Whereas before many remembered him primarily for his unfulfilled career, now they increasingly spoke of a man who had found the strength to start a new life and help others. For Harlem residents, he once again became a true authority, but for an entirely different reason. Of course, the regret over his unfulfilled professional career never disappeared. Many still wondered what kind of player Earl Manigault could have been if his life had taken a different turn. But he himself spoke less and less about lost opportunities. Far more important to him was seeing young basketball players avoid the mistakes that had changed his own destiny. But years of difficult trials did not pass without a trace. His body gradually reminded him of the price he had paid for past decisions. Ahead of Earl lay yet another difficult battle, no longer for a career or a reputation, but for his own health. By the early 1990s, Earl Manigault had long been a living legend of Harlem. Young basketball players knew him as a man who could play incredibly well and honestly speak about his own mistakes. He was respected not for the number of professional titles, but for the fact that he had managed to change his life and dedicate himself to others. However, the past continued to take its toll. Years of addiction had seriously damaged Earl's health. His heart was especially affected. Over time, the problems became so severe that doctors had to perform a major open-heart surgery. For a man who had once amazed everyone with his physical condition and incredible ease of movement, this became another difficult trial. Despite his health issues, he continued to appear on basketball courts, meet with young players, and support the development of street basketball in New York. Even when his strength was far from what it used to be, he tried to stay close to the world he had loved all his life. But his body gradually gave out. On May 15, 1998, Earl Manigault passed away. He was only 53 years old. For many Harlem residents, this news was a real shock. They were not just saying goodbye to a talented basketball player. A man was leaving whose name had been part of the neighborhood's history for decades. A man whom thousands had seen with their own eyes and about whom they would tell new generations of players for years to come. What seemed especially bitter was that most basketball fans outside New York knew almost nothing about his fate. While the names of NBA stars were forever enshrined in the league's official history, Earl Manigault remained a legend that existed mainly in the memories of eyewitnesses and the stories of those fortunate enough to have seen him play. And yet, he could not disappear from history. Every year, interest in his personality only grew. Journalists, writers, and former basketball players returned again and again to the question that had been asked during his lifetime. What could Earl Manigault have become if fate had turned out differently? There is still no definitive answer to this question, but nearly everyone who played against him or saw his best games agreed on one thing. Nature had endowed him with a talent that is extremely rare. That is why, decades after his passing, the name the GOAT continues to live on. Not because of statistics, championship rings, or records, but because of the memories of people who witnessed his incredible play. And yet, there is one detail in Earl's story that few know. It is precisely this detail that helps us truly understand why his name remains surrounded by so many legends, and why even today, the debates about him do not subside. Earl Manigault's story is unique in that it exists in two worlds at once. In one world, there are official records, statistics, and achievements by which a basketball player's career is conventionally measured. In the other, there are the memories of people who saw his play with their own eyes. And it is this second world that made Earl a true legend. After his passing, interest in Manigault's persona did not fade. On the contrary, more and more basketball fans learned about him every year. His story became the basis for a book, and in 1996, HBO released a feature film titled Rebound: The Legend of Earl the GOAT Manigault, through which the Harlem legend became known far beyond New York. But along with this, numerous stories about his incredible abilities began to be actively discussed. Over the decades, the tales became increasingly fantastic. Some claimed Earl could jump so high that he could easily touch the top of the backboard. Others were certain the famous double dunk really existed. Each new generation retold these stories, adding more and more details. And here appears that little-known fact that helps us look at his fate in an entirely different light. Earl Manigault himself said more than once during his lifetime that some of the most incredible stories about his game were not true. He did not seek to perpetuate myths around himself or turn his own biography into a beautiful fairy tale. Moreover, people who knew him well recalled that he took such stories calmly and understood how any outstanding game tends to grow legends over time. But the most amazing thing is something else. Even if you remove all the exaggerations, all the unconfirmed tales, and all the beautiful myths, what remains is the real biography of a man whom Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Connie Hawkins, and many other outstanding basketball players called one of the most talented players they had ever seen. What remains is a teenager who made all of New York talk about him. What remains is a basketball player whom thousands of people came to watch long before the era of the internet, television, and social media. And what remains is a man who, in the opinion of many contemporaries, truly had the ability to build a brilliant professional career. Perhaps that is precisely why Earl Manigault's story continues to make such a strong impression even decades later. It is not about talent guaranteeing success, quite the opposite. It is a reminder that even the rarest natural gift can prove insufficient if at some point a person strays from the right path. Perhaps that is what makes his fate one of the most tragic in basketball history. Not the absence of titles or great victories, but the realization of just how incredible his abilities were, and just how close he came to the summit. That is why the name Earl the GOAT Manigault is still spoken with respect, not as the name of an NBA champion, but as the name of a man who forever became a symbol of unfulfilled talent. And perhaps that is why his story continues to move people far more than the stories of many players whose names remain forever in the league's official statistics.